It is game week for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and plenty of guys need big weeks, not just against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but in practice. And as we reach the midway point of training camp, there are two, maybe three guys that I think are teetering on the line of breaking through to this roster or falling out of it. And this week means more than any so far. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbine. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talk or subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We are entering week 3 of Steelers training camp at St. Vincent College, and unlike the weeks before, this one is bigger. It's better. It's not as long, but it's definitely going to mean much, much more than the prior 2 weeks in Latrobe. Why? Because the Steelers play a football game this week. Football is officially back. We will see Kenny Pickett, Najee Harris, possibly Deontay Johnson and George Pickens line up for the first time in 2023 as they prepare for what is hopefully a magical run in the regular season. But first, they need to go through 3 preseason games, and those 3 preseason games, while they mean plenty to guys like I just said, Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, Najee, Jaylen Warren, Alex Highsmith, all of the defensive line that is young and new, the new inside linebackers, all of the starters, all of the vets, anybody in a position battle, this week means so much to the guys teetering on the line of making or breaking the 53-man roster. And I believe that there are a few names that are right on that line who have found themselves with both good and bad performances at training camp and are now staring down a very pivotal week for their NFL future. Let's start with the biggest name on this list, hands down, and that is Hakeem Butler. In more ways than one. Not only is he the biggest wide receiver that the Pittsburgh Steelers have, but he easily became a fan favorite right off the jump when he signed with Pittsburgh and became the XFL star that is hoping to relaunch his NFL career in the black and gold. Week 1 of training camp was a little slow for this guy, and then at the end, he kind of came out with a very strong performance. I still remember the day where he was 2, maybe 3 catches, including 2 jump balls. Very impressive day. Put him on the map. I think for the first time you felt Hakeem Butler might make this roster. Hakeem Butler might force his way onto the 53. Then he comes back in week 2, has, I'd say, a bit of a sloppy week. Wasn't his best performance. Dropped a lot of footballs. And you were starting to hit a point where it was like, is he even going to make it through those 4 weeks of training camp, or are the Steelers going to look elsewhere because this guy just isn't even meeting the standard of catch the football? You drop the football enough times as a wide receiver, your chances of making a team are almost 0. He got mossed by Joey Porter Jr. in a drill, and you thought, how could a guy who's supposed to be that tall, who's is the biggest wide receiver and the biggest player outside of Darnell Washington on the football field, how are you getting mossed in the end zone? Shouldn't happen. But he came back. He had a very strong day to end week 2. Thought he really showed out the last 2 days of practice, put himself back in contention for the 53-man roster. Now we enter week 3. He's labeled as a backup on the Steelers official depth chart. Now, don't take that with anything, if we're being honest. The Steelers depth chart is likely the same depth chart that they put together following the NFL draft, just to say, yeah, whatever, man. This is what we got. This is what we're working with. These are the guys. Put them on there however you feel. It doesn't matter. The first depth chart means almost nothing, and Mike Tomlin will most certainly address that and say the exact same thing once we talk to him today. But Hakeem Butler's got a shot, and I think that it's not going to be easy, but the rest of the names that we thought would surprise us haven't. Des Fitzpatrick has kind of slipped under the radar a little bit more. Jordan Byrd hasn't really done much. Cody White has been impressive, but you got to think, how long, if you've been on this team long enough, how long do you go before your shot of making the 53-man roster just seemingly disappears? And is he on the verge of being that guy that's just a lifelong practice squad member? Or is he on the verge of a breakthrough to make the 53-man roster? That's a huge question. But Hakeem Butler seemed like the only guy that you were watching of that lower group and thought, okay, there's some noise here. There's some plays. There's something to watch. Maybe this could happen, which means that week 3 and a game against Tampa Bay means everything to this guy. It determines whether or not this is real or this is not. Is Hakeem Butler going to show out, build enough momentum? Because it's not just about heading into the game and saying, okay, I dominated against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. No, you have to have the momentum going in there. You have to have the eyes of the coaches so that you can get quality reps, more reps, and be able to utilize them to build your stock. A lot of guys have big games. I mean, look at Rico Bussey many moons ago, a guy who was a training camp favorite with the third team, a guy who balled out in the preseason with the late Dwayne Haskins. And you thought, wow, this guy is having a phenomenal preseason, but he didn't make the 53-man roster. Why? Because there wasn't continual momentum. It was just, here's a big game, here's a big performance. That's all that he's looking for. Tyler Vaughns is another name from last year who did the same thing. It's about having momentum. It's not about one big performance or two big performances. Hakeem Butler's got to build up until Friday, and then on Friday, he's got to have himself a day. I think number 2, James Pierre. And I don't know if James Pierre gets bumped from the 53-man roster, but I think at this point, with the guys who have been around him, the players who have been competing, I guess, for that final cornerback spot, there hasn't been much competition, which isn't great because I came in here with the understanding that Luke Barku was going to continue to shine and kind of have himself a day or a training camp. And until this final day, maybe 2 days of week 2, there weren't really anything positive to say about Luke Barku. James Pierre, on the other hand, has had good days, and he's also had very bad days. And I think at 27 years old, when you're this big of a vet, when you've been around here long enough, and you should be an easy decision to stay on the roster, you have to secure something, and it should have happened a while ago. I think that that's kind of the boat we were in with Anthony McFarland, and we see where he is right now. Anthony McFarland came into the offseason, came into the summer with an opportunity to say, hey, look it, this is my time, man. I am making this team. There are no questions asked. I am the RB3. Get out of here with these undrafted guys. And I think so far he's done that. James Pierre had the same opportunity and hasn't taken the same type of advantage. So you need a big week. And then you need to go into the game, and you'll most likely get first team reps at least at some point, because Patrick Peterson isn't taking the field. Levi Wallace probably isn't taking the field. It'll be Joey Porter Jr. and chances are James Pierre across from him for a majority of the first quarter, if not a majority of the game where James Pierre is in there. You have to have the momentum going in there to say, for one, I am 100% the guy who will be lined up across from Joey Porter Jr. if he plays. I get he's dealing with an injury. For the first team, for the starters, I have to be able to prove that I could compete with the starters. But I have to go into the game with enough momentum to say, this is the final strike. This is the final moment. Nobody could surpass me because I have already built it up and then put an explanation point on it and said, it's done. It's over with. I've done this. Signed, sealed, delivered. I'm on the 53-man roster. End of story. That's where James Pierre needs to do this week. If he does, I think that, well, it's all his. If he doesn't, I think that there's a battle coming down to that final week, and I think Luke Barku has an opportunity to do the same thing that James Pierre has an opportunity to do, and that's just to showcase all week long, I'm ready for this. I can do this. I'm here to make plays. Finally on this list are 2 guys, Elijah Riley and Shannon Sullivan. Right now, I don't know how you keep either of them off the roster. They look very good. They're making plays. They look like veterans. They look calm and collected with the first team. Nobody's getting by them. Yeah, at moments they'll give up a pass, but so will everybody else. It's not an alarming person to have on the field. It is not a wasted spot for the Steelers. It appears that they have two starter quality guys, or at bare minimum, very quality depth guys at the nickelback position. But that competition is red hot right now. And this week and that first game is going to determine so much about who makes the actual roster, or if both of them make the actual roster. I'd say that it's a slim chance that the Steelers keep both of these guys. I just don't see how you find a roster spot for a second nickelback when you have other positions of need and other depth pieces that you're going to rely on. It just doesn't make much sense. But both of these guys have played very well. Both of these guys have stepped up in big moments and made big plays and continued to shine. There hasn't been dull moments for either of them. And I just think that this week you head into the game, if you can continue to earn that spot, I think the two practices before the game will determine who starts. From there, it's about how much impact you have on the game. And if you have a good impact, especially if you could earn that starting gig in week 1 of the preseason, I think you have an upper hand heading into the final week of training camp. I don't know who's going to show out, and I know that I've been a big Elijah Riley guy, but I will give Shannon Sullivan all the props, man. He has looked very cool, calm, and good, like a quality player out on that field. I say it's a hard time to say this guy isn't worth a roster spot, but I feel the same way about Elijah Riley. And I am very, very excited about what both of them will bring in week 3 of training camp, along with Hakeem Butler and along with James Pierre, as we approach the first preseason game. Get ready for some actual football to be played by the Pittsburgh Steelers with a few, if not more, players and competition battles that will rely heavily on stepping into Tampa Bay Stadium and showing out.